I've built this knack of cold emailing. I've had this knack for the last decade. In 2012-13, I got Paul Graham to respond to my email, and we had a conversation back and forth. I got Naveen Silverdurai to respond to my email. He was the co-founder at Foursquare. And this is all before I joined Uber. After I have Uber on my profile, it makes it slightly easier to get responses from a few people. And it's not hard figuring out what their emails are, especially the founders. It's going to be first name at the domain name, or it's going to be first name dot last name. And there are ways to figure out if it's the right email or not. And because I've mastered, I know what to write in the subject line. I know what to write.
My next guest on the 1% project is Utsav Agarwal. Utsav is an entrepreneur, a networker, and a hustler. He kicked off his career in the music industry, managing Indian rock bands, went on to build a music app. Post his entrepreneurial stint, he went and joined Uber, where he launched 8 Indian cities and Dhaka in Bangladesh, which broke all growth records. Post Uber, he went and joined Glovo through a simple cold email outreach. At Glovo, he launched 9 Eastern European markets, built a team of 250 plus people, and today Glovo has been acquired by Delivery Hero for $2.6 billion. Utsav is now back to entrepreneurship, building Evenflow, which is a roll-up platform acquiring and scaling e-commerce businesses. In this conversation, he talks about his entrepreneurial journey and what did he learn, launching Uber in Dhaka and its challenges, reaching out to Glovo through a cold email, and his framework for launching in new markets, the value and the technique of cold emailing, and why has he started Evenflow. If you have any feedback about this conversation, speaker or topic recommendations, you can drop me a line at pritish@1%.live. You can also sign up for the 1% Project newsletter, where you will get the show notes and the key insights from this conversation and every other conversation. We kick this off with Utsav asking him about his first entrepreneurial journey.
Before I was a music entrepreneur, I was into the music business. Like so many other Indians, I am an engineer by academics, passed out in 2007. While I was doing engineering, I really got into this independent rock scene, which has been taken over by the electronica scene in India, at least over the last 5 to 6 years. At that point, there was a scene happening and a lot of shows happening. And I started managing a couple of bands that were doing well. And this is while I was doing engineering. And I enjoyed it so much that I decided that I'm going to pursue this as my career. Graduated, I went and worked for EMI Music. I went and worked for Bombay Rock Association. I managed more bands. I did marketing for artists. I put shows together. And right after that, I went to LA to study music business at UCLA. It was a certificate course. It was extremely cheap. It was about $8,500, which is cheaper than even 1 year B school, what they charge you these days. I studied there. I worked in the industry there for a year. Being in LA kind of exposed me to the digital side of things, be it with music or non-music. 2 apps that took off during my time in LA were Groupon and Foursquare from nothing. So when I came back in 2011, I decided to get into the tech ecosystem in India. In 2011, it was extremely small. The way I networked is actually through Twitter and by going through these Twitter meetups or these startup events. I still remember I ended up meeting one of our first investors at a startup Saturday event, which used to happen every second Saturday or once every month at SPGen, which is an engineering college in Andheri in Bombay. So long story short, I was into music business. I saw where the buck was headed. It was digital. My professors came in and told me while I was studying music business that the physical CD is a shiny round object. If you want to do anything worthwhile in the industry, it's going to happen on the digital front. And hence that kickstart after coming back into the music tech entrepreneurship, if you want to call it.
So, what did you learn from your first startup? What worked and what didn't?
A lot more didn't work than what did. We were too heavily focused on the design aspect, actually beautifying the app and the whole user experience on how they operate the app. But while we were doing that, we actually lost track of retention and monetization. That was one of the key learnings while I was doing and building that startup. Also, I didn't have a clue on how to look at data or analytics. I hadn't worked at a tech startup. I wasn't coming from that background. So I didn't know how to even get data in place to start looking at it, to start making decisions. Those are the 2 core things that went wrong. What we did was I was able to build a formidable team. It was 5 people, 1 iOS engineer, 1 Android, 1 backend, 1 designer. We were living in the same apartment at Diamond District, Bangalore. If you go to Bangalore, Diamond District is where a lot of startups are born. And we were building the product out of there. As a startup, we had the right team, had the right energy. We just couldn't build something that could scale. And that was because we weren't able to take the right decisions in terms of how to retain the user and how to monetize. And at a certain point, after doing it for 2 years, I personally started hitting a wall to a point where I decided to shut that down.
You did land up after your stint in entrepreneurship being a market launcher for Uber.
Yeah.
So you launched Dhaka. How was your experience going to a market like Dhaka, and tell us, what did you learn there?
No disrespect to Dhaka, but the first time I landed there, I had a feeling this is what Americans feel when they land in India. It's a country which is about 5 to 10 years behind India in terms of infrastructure, in terms of just amenities. And there is a whole lot more of class divide than what in India. The middle class is just beginning to form, which happened, I would say, over the 90s or 2000s in India. But the good thing of being in a market like that is it's uncharted territory. You can get access to a lot more influential people than you can in India. Because of Uber being the brand name it is, I was able to rub shoulders with some of the ministers, do a lot of policy work, and make inroads into launching that market. But that market was hard, was really hard. And I'll give you an instance. It was hard to a point where the banking regulations is so archaic, and I don't know if they've changed. Is if you do an international wire into Dhaka, it can take anything from a week to 6 months for that money to hit the beneficiary bank. And the system they have in place is the beneficiary bank will actually post a snail mail to the beneficiary who has to come to the bank and justify why they are receiving this international remittance. And this is important to us launching Uber because we had to pay our drivers. And driver partners in emerging markets more than developed markets are hand to mouth people. If they don't get paid on a certain day every week, they don't have money to put gas into the car. So that was one challenge. Two more challenges, just interesting anecdotes from launching Dhaka. This is the same year, March 2016, is when Bangladesh had the worst terrorist attack. This is July 2nd, and they had a $81 million siphoned out of the central bank, which is meant to be $1 billion, and it got saved because of a typo. So I was right in the mix of this, trying to work with the central bank on the financial piece to get money into the country. I was trying to work with the transport ministry to launch Uber, and Uber was beginning to get this name in the globally that it's not the safest option right after the terrorist attack. So it was hard, but once we launched and the kind of uptake that we had, it became the fastest growing market for Uber in APAC and it broke all records.
Why did Uber think that it's a good market to start with, especially when you saw so many challenges just in setting up the logistics of the business?
Seeing challenges doesn't mean that you shouldn't launch a market. In terms of what made me confident about the potential in the market is there was no public transport. There was either your state run buses or you had taxis, which were exorbitantly expensive, and they were probably three or 400 in total. So even if someone wanted to step out and go from a place A to place B, they didn't have that optionality. And I knew that Dhaka and Bangladesh as an economy is growing. They had two startups go to YC. There was one Chaldal, and there was someone else. This is pre 2016. Post 2016, there's Shop Up, which has raised a considerable amount of money, has been as part of Sequoia Surge. Grameen Phone was willing to invest a lot of money, and Grameen Phone is like the biggest telco, which is a JV between Grameen and Telenor from Norway. So it had the right recipe. It was just that no one was willing to come and take a bet on Dhaka. I internally faced a lot of resistance to it, to a point where our own leadership had given me an ultimatum of either you launch in 2 weeks or we pull back from the market. Thankfully, I kept buying myself time for another 2 months and ended up launching the market.
What kind of growth frameworks did you develop while you were launching Dhaka? And you've also launched around 8 cities in India as well for Uber. So when you look up a new market, when you're given the challenge of going into a new city or a new country, what kind of growth frameworks do you have you developed over a period of time?
When you're in the launch mode, you have to really first, as step one, figure out is this market going to be demand constrained or supply constrained? Dhaka was a supply constrained market. So For the first probably 4 to 5 months, we didn't even have to do anything on the demand piece. We could put 100 cars on the road in a day, and those would just get sucked into the demand that we were seeing. So it was all about how can we get more cars? How can we onboard these drivers faster? And third problem we had to solve for Dhaka at that point, which wasn't a problem for Uber in 2013-14 when it launched in India. How do we get these guys, equip them with smartphones? So it might seem like a small problem now, but when Uber launched India for the first 2 years, and Ola was just they were just doling out smartphones for free. Right. Post 2016 is when Uber rolled out in India. They had this in US and other markets before that, something called BYOD, bring your own device. When I was launching Dhaka, none of these drivers had smartphones at that point. Now, obviously, 4 years in, even if someone is not driving on Uber, they would. I had to solve for how do we equip them? And what we realized is if you're new in a country, even if you're the best brand name like Uber, you don't want to go and try to work with the number one or number two player. So I went to Samsung, got kicked out of there, went to one more player, a global name, which was selling handsets. And the idea was, hey, will you partner with us to give subsidized phones to the driver? And I can promise like 1,000 or 10,000 handsets over the next quarter. You remember how India had Micromax back in 2014-15? So Bangladesh had local handsets. They were manufactured in China, but they were local brands and assembled. We partnered with one of them, and what we did interesting is we got them to put up a stall at our onboarding center, and we told all the drivers who were coming to get onboarded that you have to come with 2 post-dated checks to pay for the phone. You get the phone for free, but you pay for it via the post-dated checks. And the post-dated check has to be the same account that you're giving us where we would pay you after you work. Was there a risk of these drivers just running away with the phone? Yes, absolutely. But because we were able to solve that core problem, we were able to onboard drivers and unlock, I would say, supply in the market and hence get demand. If you take some other market, and I could take Glovo's example, or I can take Uber's example in a Surat or Baroda, which are not supply constrained and they're demand constrained, then it's a very different challenge. Either you have to play on pricing, or you're playing with local partnerships to get the word out, to drive that usage and to show people what they can use Uber daily for. It's basically, it can be a replacement for your car. How do you show that? Which is now evident to most. But back in 2014-15, it was still considered as a service that you would use maybe once if I was stepping out at night, but not on a daily commute to work and back.
You have worked closely and observed the Indian market grow, and specifically in the transportation sector. What did Ola get right about the Indian market?
Localization, they did cash. And when I say we, Uber was resistant to cash for the longest time. Uber only piloted with cash in May 2015 in Hyderabad, and it took another 8 months to be rolled out pan India. Things could be different now because of demonetization and because of the UPI and payment apps. But back then, people wanted to pay with cash. And even today, people want to pay with cash. The businessman specifically who don't want to use their little white money. And I think aggression, one thing you have to give it to Bhavish, that he didn't take a single punchline down. I think in terms of they didn't have the best tech. One thing you can afford to do in emerging markets, and you can throw people at the problem. When Uber had 3 people in a city operating, he would throw 25, 30 people to go and get the same work done. And the aggression that they had was if we did something, they would be back, step up within a week or 10 days. And they had no shame in copying. They had no shame in I don't think it was branded well. I don't think the mobile app worked, but just by sheer perseverance and aggression, they pushed through. And at the end of the day, what enabled all of this is Bhavish's ability to also raise capital. November 2014, if I remember correctly, I woke up and I read a news that Ola had raised like $100 million round. And back then, $100 million round was still massive, right? Like now it's a everyday thing. And they raised from SoftBank. I think Bhavish's ability to do that and find someone who would want to go against Uber, that's commendable. I don't know if how the service is doing today, but he gave Uber a run for its money.
From Uber, you landed up joining Glovo through sending a cold email, and you landed Glovo 9 Eastern European countries and built a team of 250 plus people. Walk us through the whole experience. How did the cold email happen? How did you convince the founder? who probably would have never heard of you. What made them take a call on you? And these markets that you actually helped Glovo with, you had never been in those markets.
So this is post Uber. I'd moved out of Uber in October 2017, and I was looking for my next gig. I wanted to either be in Southeast Asia or Europe. And I started looking at different companies that I could go join and contribute to. Glovo wasn't a name that you would hear that time. It was probably a small team of 40 to 50 people. They had raised some money. They were operational in 4 countries. I was basically going through TechCrunch, and I was reading TechCrunch from April onwards. In November, I would just like keep going back and just keep reading about which are the interesting companies. I would spend time on AngelList looking at all the companies that are raised capital, that are doing something interesting. And I've built this knack of cold emailing. I've had this knack for the last decade. In 2012-13, I got Paul Graham to respond to my email, and we had a conversation back and forth. I got Naveen Silvadurai to respond to my email. He was the co-founder at Foursquare. And this is all before I joined Uber. After I have Uber on my profile, it makes it slightly easier to get responses from a few people. And it's not hard figuring out what their emails are, especially the founders. It's going to be first name at the domain name, or it's going to be first name dot last name. And there are ways to figure out if it's the right email or not. And because I've mastered, I know what to write in the subject line. I know what to write. That email was literally, it was, hey, Oscar, one line, another line, cheers, what's up? He responds in 4 to 5 days. His first ask was, hey, are you okay with moving out of India? And he responded because he saw Uber in there, and he saw a startup founder before Uber. And then we got on a couple of conversations. What helped this was Neil Vass. Neil Vass used to be head VP international for Uber for a year and a half. He was reporting into Ryan Graves, who was reporting into Travis. And Neil was working closely with Glovo as an advisor. So Oscar said, hey, I really like this conversation, but I want you to speak to Neil, who you might know. And I said, yes. And me and Neil had interacted on a couple of things while he was at Uber. So he remembered me. We had a great conversation. It was literally 3 conversations. And 3 weeks later, I was on a flight to Barcelona. I hadn't been to Spain before that. As for launching new markets, obviously, the team at Glovo headquarters helped me a lot in terms of how to look at these different markets, Eastern European markets, how to study them a little before even going in. In terms of launching, it's very important for you to go and enable a network of people that you can start talking to, that you can hire from, that can help you identify a local law firm, a local tax consultant, a local office, a recruitment firm maybe, because these are the things that you would need to do to launch any new market, and also understand what's the local flavor. How does this country work? How long does it take to get things done? Because Eastern European is also somewhat corrupted. It's not as corrupted as India, but it's not as clean as the developed markets like US and like most countries in Europe. And the framework I built there is, before I even go into any new country, it's a simple Google search, top startups in Ukraine, top startups in Romania, top startups in Georgia. And you'll always find a list of 15, 20 startups out there. Go to them, figure out who their CEO is. It's very easy. Again, it'll be either listed on the website or you can go and check it on LinkedIn. Drop them an email. Tell them, hey, you're from Glovo, you're ex Uber, and you're coming into the country and spending a week, and you just like to catch up over a cup of coffee or a beer. You'll be surprised at how many people respond and say yes to that. I would say about 60 to 70%. And those conversations are the ones that kind of start opening up your network, because you can start pinging them. If I post a job posting for a general manager or operations manager in Kiev, my LinkedIn network will have no one there. But if I can get that startup founder to share that on his or her LinkedIn, I can start getting decent resumes into my pipeline. That's the framework I used. And obviously the Uber's network, there was people from Uber, and I ended up hiring about 4 to 5 people from Uber in these markets, hired a lot of people from e-commerce, hired people from other delivery companies. And that kind of, it just builds up from there, because they also speak English, which is also a constraint. Even if I wanted to onboard a driver in Dhaka or any of these riders in European countries or restaurant, I can't do it. I don't speak the local language. And to be able to chat and build that comfort, especially as a new company in a country, you need to build that comfort. And these are the people, the network or the initial few hires or They will help me with consultants to work for a month or two. That's the secret. That's one of the secret sauce of just going in and launching a country is network with the startup fraternity in emerging markets. It's much smaller. They can start connecting you to one another within a couple of weeks or within 10 days, who's who. And if you end up launching a market, they are the ones who can help you find your first five people, get your initial business, connect you to the right people in publications, press, and build from there.
That's a great framework, actually. You have this interesting story of doing a partnership with McDonald's when they had a global understanding with Uber.
Getting McDonald's as a partner when you're launching a country is like it's like gold dust in Europe, in US, and it's special. It becomes a whole lot more valuable if McDonald's has never delivered before. So McDonald's had never delivered before in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Romania. We through Oscar connected me through the managing director of Europe, who then connected me to country-wise McDonald's. One thing that everyone should know is just how McDonald's operates globally. They have two structures. One is franchisee. The entire country is franchised out, or second, which is their own subsidiary. When it's a franchisee, they don't have that much control, and the managing director takes the control for the country. And subsidiary, obviously, they have a little more control. Even though there was a global partnership done at a Chicago headquarters level with Uber Eats, the local countries and the managing directors were free to take their own bets with the player whom they deemed fit, who would put in more money on the table for marketing, who would be able to meet their delivery SLAs and just activate. This is 2018. This is a year before Uber is going public. I have all the love for Uber in the world, even today. But knowing that because Uber is going public the next year and the mammoth that they've become, they will slow down as an organization in terms of decision making. And I basically used that against them in our meetings in Georgia, Ukraine, Romania with the managing director. Told them that, hey, I come from Uber, all the respect and love for that company, but we can give you a lower commission percentage. So we charge you a lower commission. We are happy to put more money on co-marketing dollars. And I can guarantee you five delivery riders standing at each outlet for the first 3 weeks of launch, which I don't know if Uber Eats would be able to comply with because they have certain thresholds, more thresholds to keep in mind. It's not like it happened quickly. It still took 3 to 4 months. But in Georgia, in Ukraine, because we ended up launching with McDonald's, for the first few months, 40% of our orders were coming from McDonald's itself. If you get McDonald's, you can dial back your customer acquisition cost because McDonald's, just having McDonald's deliver for the first time, it's like charm for everyone. And we were successful. We beat Uber Eats to it. And Uber Eats has withdrawn from Ukraine. Uber Eats has withdrawn from Romania because they were not able to scale fast enough once we got McDonald's and we got that initial scale to make the unit economics work. So, lesson of the story is if you're a young startup who can be more nimble, you can use that to your advantage and to others the biggie's disadvantage. I'm not good at frameworks. If you ask me to put this down, I'm not. But if you give me a situation, I'll figure out the best way to go about it.
You're good at frameworks, you just haven't got the time to put them on paper. Obviously, it has worked out for you. Coming to your present startup, Evenflow, tell us what it is. And the second is that why you're building, among all the ideas and avenues and the background, you've chosen to focus on this industry.
So I came back home mid 2019 and I was always looking for something entrepreneurial to do. And it didn't mean that it had to be my own thing. I was also open to joining someone early stage and working closely with them to build that startup. Sometime October, November last year is when I read up about Thrashio. I heard a podcast or two from Carlos Cashman and their VP acquisitions, Ken Kubik, and I read about the business model of been what they've been able to build successfully over the last year and a half. This is 2020, and my eyes lit up because I don't come from private equity, but it just made sense. I'm a bunya, and it just made sense that this is a business. You buy out these businesses that are selling online. And I, even as an outsider at that point, outsider from the e-commerce perspective, I understood that yes, making small changes to catalog or title or description or pay-per-click ads can make a world of a difference to the sales that you do and the EBITDA that you have. Once I was smitten by it, it was all about going and proving it out that this model would work. Again, I'm really good at cold outreach and just kickstarting a conversation out of nowhere. I got in touch with about 150 top Amazon sellers, had one on one conversations, and understood what they were doing, what they were not doing, and learned enough challenges and saw a few of them were okay to kind of raise money or sell the business. Once that happened, I just knew that this was something that I wanted to pursue and go on and build. I'm an outsider still to e-commerce. I don't come from Amazon, Flipkart, or working in any of the e-commerce, but I try to think from common sense, just logic, and think of it as a virtual Kirana store.
You have now raised from a number of notable angel investors and also from Village Global. So tell us about that experience and how did that happen?
Our initial pre-seed round, there was 9 unicorns and Equanimity. And through 9 unicorns, I got connected to this guy named Anand Chandrasekharan. He's ex-Snapdeal, ex-Facebook, working with this company called Five9, which got acquired by Zoom, but the deal fell off. It got blocked out by the regulators in US, I'm not sure. So I was talking to him, and he's a fan of the model. He's invested at a personal level, and he's come on board as an advisor. He ended up connecting me to the COO at Village Global, Antoine. And it's just one of those things like fairy tale stories. We had 2 conversations, and within 2 conversations, a week later, Anne came back and said, "Hey, we'll go ahead with you guys." We didn't have a business that time. We weren't generating any revenue. We were still building out the team, building out a strategy on how to go about it. I'm guessing she saw something, and it happened rather quickly. The round didn't. The round took its own 4 to 5 months, and it's been hard because of the headwinds that are coming from something we spoke about earlier, the other big players in India, the Mensa, the global Bs who have raised a ton of capital. It took the round was difficult, but Village Global confirmed in August, and it's been smooth ever since, at least with them.
The local competition within in India for such a model is also growing. Global Bees, Mensa is the fastest unicorn in the world. How do you see this panning out given a number of players entering the market?
There are a few aspects to this. I don't see this space as a duopoly or a triopoly, and ride sharing and food delivery are those. You couldn't have had more than 2 players coexist in a region. Best examples: Uber, Ola, Taxi for sure. Taxi for sure got bought out. Zomato, Uber Eats got bought out. So the unit economics of those businesses doesn't make sense if you're the third player. You're not able to achieve enough scale to hit your to be efficient on a orders per hour or trips per hour. This business model would have multiple players coexist. There are probably 6 right now, and I won't be surprised if there are another 5 to 10 that come up in 2022 having their own niche. In US and Europe, already you're seeing at least 10 plus players each that are operating in these countries. And I won't even say that they are going after a particular niche, they're going after the same thing. But the market is so huge that all of them can easily coexist. Amazon FBA, third party sellers on Amazon would do $300 billion of revenue this year with about 15% EBITDA. That's how much you can acquire. Let's say even 50% or 20% of it you can acquire. That's 50 or $60 billion of businesses you can acquire globally. How much of it has been acquired till date? Maybe a billion or 2 billion. There's a lot left to be rolled up. Now, coming to Mensa and Global Bees, what they're building, though I don't know the insider information, from outside, it seems like they're going after D2C brands and they're paying revenue multiples to acquire these businesses. And they're looking at each brand as a separate unit that runs with its own team, and they're acquiring much larger businesses. So it's almost a GMV play for them. How much GMV can they acquire and roll up? We have not been focused on that. We've been focused on much smaller sellers that sit anywhere in between $300,000 to about $1.5 million annual top line with about 10 to 15% EBITDA. Another thing with what Mensa and Global Bees they're going after is a lot of these D2C brands are not profitable. So the business model they have is almost a derivative of Thrasio, but it's not Thrasio. If you look at Thrash's business model, it is to acquire profitable businesses using debt and use the cash flow and the profitability of the business to pay back. So it'll be interesting to see how the market pans out over the next couple of years. I like to say, though there has been a lot of noise, and rightly because of the amount of capital that's gone into this space and ecosystem, it's only after about 6 to 8 or a year will you start realizing how much is every player able to grow these acquisitions. At the end of the day, you can make 15 acquisitions, but if you're not able to grow them, and if you're not able to scale them profitably, then the business model starts falling flat on its face, irrespective of the GMV that you acquired. So it'll be interesting. There are certain buckets that are starting to form. We would put ourselves in the same bucket as Powerhouse 91. There's another player which is funded by Titan Capital, by Kunal Behl. They are taking much similar approach to this as us. Then obviously you have the Mensa and Global Bees, which everyone's talking about because of the capital that they've raised. Then there's Goat, Upscale 10 Club, I would say somewhere the second tier. But it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Even a Thrasher is looking to enter India, and I won't be surprised if more of the global players like a Razor Group, a CellerX, a Perch, they start looking at India sometime in 2022. I like to think of India as the last frontier.
Before we close, my question to you would be, what has been the role of a mentor in your career?
Role of a mentor. It's an interesting one. I haven't had that relationship with someone who I've called a mentor, but I've learned from people who I think of them as my mentor. There were a couple of people at Uber. There's a guy named Alan Penn. He was nicknamed the machine because the way he was able to operate and the response time he had to email. There was a lot to learn from that guy and just the attention to detail he had and the number of markets and regions he was looking at. Similarly, at Glovo, Oscar, a very different personality from Uber. Uber was this frat boy aggression. Here you have Oscar, who's a lot more mellower, doesn't speak as much, but has persevered through the hardest times over the last 7 to 8 years when the going has got tough in terms of fundraising or growth and built a $2 billion business today. So I've learned bits and pieces. And I think my mentor in some way, as I said, like, right, they've not been, that relationship hasn't been there, but music has been a mentor to me. Pearl Jam, it answers a lot of things for me. And that's the company is named after one of their songs, Evenflow. The t-shirt that I'm wearing right now is Pearl Jam, just happens to be. I can call them my mentor. It's not that relationship.
Brilliant. That's a great place to close this conversation. Thanks, Utsav, for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Tayo. Pleasure being here. Thanks, Pratish.